Hello and welcome. I'm glad you're here. Today I'll be teaching you 3 tips for your wrists and your hands in downward facing dog. Now, down dog is a pose we could workshop all day long. Even just our elbow, wrist, and hand placement we could workshop for at least a day. So in this video, I will stick with just 3 tips that I find are most helpful. They're a good place to start when learning how to place your hands and your wrists for downward facing dog. So whether you've been practicing for a week or for 20 years, oftentimes people really have never been taught where to place their hands and really don't know the options for hand and wrist placement in order to keep your hands and your wrists happy and healthy for the long term. So this is just the beginning stage of tips of where to place your hands in order for your wrist to stay pain-free. Now, one thing it's really important to understand is that our wrists, just like any other joint in the body, are not designed for the same amount of movement. So that means that depending on your structure, your bony structure that you were born into this world with, that you cannot change, your wrists may have a lot of extension and or flexion. And then someone else may have less extension and flexion in their wrist. And that may have nothing to do with how strong your wrists are or how flexible your wrists and your forearms are, but it really has to do with your bony structure in your body. So that means that in down dog, if you have a limited range of extension in your wrist, then we'll have to modify for that. And that's really true also for plank and for all fours, hands and knees. Because again, our wrists, depending on the person, vary with how much they can extend and how much they can flex. So, to start, I'd like you to place your hands a little bit wider than you think your shoulders are. Most people I find place their hands too close together. For whatever reason, they think that their shoulders are more narrow than they are. So, however wide you think your shoulders are, take your hands a little bit wider, and that will help to open up your chest. It'll help to gain flexibility in your upper back and in your arms and give you a little bit more strength. So take your hands a little bit wider than you think shoulder distance is. And now, oftentimes people turn their pointer finger forward. And when you do that, in a lot of people in their arms, it starts to turn their arms in, which means they're internally rotating their arms a little bit. In downward facing dog, we want to externally rotate our arms. So I suggest for most people a good starting place is to have the pointer finger forward, so your index finger forward. And then when your index finger is forward, for most people, the wrist crease, right where your forearm meets the palm of your hand here, then for most people the wrist crease is parallel to the front of the mat. And again, this is rough. It's going to vary from person to person. But the wrist crease parallel to the front of the mat also helps to protect the wrist when it comes to weight bearing. And with the pointer finger forward, the shoulders and the arms have more ability to externally rotate. So that's one thing you want to think of. You put your pointer finger forward, or you're looking for the wrist crease to be parallel to the front of your mat. Now, oftentimes in down dog, we hear people here to press down between the thumb and the index finger. That is good, but we also want to evenly work the hands and the forearms so that if you're only pressing down into gravity and into your mat, then you're not working the underneath side of your forearm. So there's that imbalance in the lower arm. So we do want to gently ground down through that inner edge just to balance out the weight between the inner and the outer palm. But at the same time, I'm going to suggest for you today that you also think of just gripping with your fingertips. And this is so slight here. But as you ground down through that thumb and index finger, also grip with your fingertips, just slightly like this, so that the underneath side of your hand engages and the underneath side of your forearm has to work and resist gravity a little bit. And that action of just gently gripping your fingertips, not a huge claw, but just gentle, will then help lift you up out of gravity. So if you're just pressing your palms down, you are pressing into gravity and, in a sense, overstretching these muscles. So you press down and at the same time also grip a little with the fingers, and you'll engage those muscles so that you can take some of the weight out of your wrists. So I'd start with those two things, pointer finger forward or the wrist crease parallel to the front of your mat. Remember that most people take their hands a little bit too close together, so you take your hands a little wider than you think shoulder distance is. And then add that little bit of gripping, just a little with your fingers, so you feel your lower arm engage and lift you up out of your resting gravity. Now from here, in down dog or in plank or hands and knees, they're all very similar. When you're in downward facing dog here, I'm gently pressing between the thumb and index finger and also gripping a little bit with my fingers. Now, depending on your wrists, your shoulders, your arms, you still may need a little bit less on your wrists. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's all sorts of gadgets we can use. We can use blocks, we can use a wedge, we can use these foam barbell looking things. There's lots of ways to adjust for our wrists in down dog. If you don't have any of those props, and I'm not going to get into those today, another great option that I use a lot is to hold the edges of the mat like this. So then, when you come into down dog, when your hands are a little bit wider, this will help most people open up the back body, so helps most people spread the shoulder blades wider. It also helps to externally rotate the arms, and when you do this, you have less crease in your wrist. So it helps to open up the arms and the shoulders in external rotation. The wrist crease is decreased by having your hands in this position. And it's a little bit less of a wrist crease or extension for many people as opposed to having their hands straight forward in down dog. So if it's okay on your knuckles, placing your hands, gripping the outer edges of your mat can be really helpful for many of us. And just keep in mind that we need to mix these things up. Right? So some days you may want to take the outer edges of the mat. Some days you may want to have your palms flat. Some days you'd want to be on your fingertips. So many options, and the variety is really good for our body. So keep in mind that if your wrists are sensitive when they're weight bearing, know that you're not alone, and that may really depend on just the structure of your bones and how much your wrists extend and flex. It also could mean that you need to do some extra stretching of the forearm, both the bottom and the top side. That will help. And also, obviously, watch that in down dog, plank, hands and knees, that you have not only the energy of pressing down into your palms, but also that little gripping with your fingers so that you're lifting weight up out of your wrists and resisting gravity. So try that out. Again, hands a little bit wider than you think shoulder distance is. Pointer finger forward so your wrist crease is parallel to the front of the mat. And then as you gently press down, also grip with your fingertips a little bit to lift the weight up out of your wrists and resist gravity. Work with that. And then try holding the edges of your mat like this, as long as it's okay in your knuckles. You spread your shoulder blades, you breathe deeply. And this is a great option for many people to decrease that wrist angle and be able to be in down dog pain-free in their wrists. All right, so thanks for joining me again. I'll have more tutorials and mini workshops on downward facing dog. Again, we could cover this topic for the rest of our life. So start with what I discussed today. Try those things out. I hope they help. And subscribe to the channel. Like the videos that you find helpful. Have a great day, and I will see you very soon.